Today I'm going to talk about unpacking a standard. As a math teacher, I of course picked the math standard from the Common Core State Standards. The standard that I pick is the high school functions, interpreting function, analyzing functions using different representations 7.8. As its name indicates, this standard applies to high school algebra level. In my case, my 10th grade students were learning algebra, so this was a standard that applied to their curriculum. This standard states that students should be able to graph linear and quadratic functions and show intercepts, maxima, and minima. The reason why I picked this standard is because functions are very important in math and can be easily applied in real life. Linear and quadratic functions are important because any data that can fit in these two types of functions help us make predictions and correlations in real life scenarios, such as the cost of production, the rise and fall of profits, how age affects our physical performance, and many more. It also helps us identify the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable in experiments and observations. The big ideas in this standard include understanding the shapes of graphs and answer questions like, what can the shape tell us? Do the numbers make sense? Students also need to understand the components of a function. What are the independent and dependent variables? What are the components and what is their meaning? Lastly, with the above information, they should be able to not only construct the graph, but also explain it in terms of real-life applications. In order to attain these big ideas, students need to use a variety of skills. Students use their problem-solving skills to create a function using a given data. Then, they need to transfer the function into a graph. During the process, they will need to use critical thinking to decide what are the independent and dependent variables, what the slope means, and so on. If students are paired up or put in small groups, they need to collaborate and communicate with each other when presenting their ideas. After they manually graph the function, they will need to transfer the graph using technological tools such as graphing calculators and computers, especially if they are to present it in front of the class. In order for students to meet the standards, different projects and activities could be used. For example, the I do, we do, you do it together, you do it alone activity is great for practicing the calculation parts, such as finding the slope and the intercepts. I would first demonstrate how to solve a problem, and they ask students to come to the board to complete a couple problems. Afterwards, students get to work on part of a worksheet together, and lastly, they will continue working on the worksheet individually. An activity that helps with familiarizing concepts is the use of task cards. Students are paired up and each have a set of task cards with questions and answers about concept questions, such as what is the dependent variable in a given scenario. They will ask each other questions on the task card, and once they get the answer correct, they can put aside the card. However, if they get their answer wrong, they will need to recycle the card and use it again at a later time. This goes on until they finish all sets of task cards and have all the answers correct. Project-based learning is also quite helpful in building students' understanding of how linear and quadratic functions and their graphs can be useful in the real world, not just in their math class. Students form groups of 3 or 4 and are given a real-life scenario in the areas of banking or investment, economics, health, and so on. They will need to research data and transfer that data onto a table, and they will use the organized data to create an approximate function. Once they have the function, they can graph it. Lastly, students will make a presentation about their findings, such as any predictions or conclusions. It is important to check that students understand the concept and are progressing with the class. I use different forms of assessments to check their understanding. For non-graded assignments, I use formative assessments. I especially like to use exit tickets at the end of every lesson to make adjustments to my future lessons and differentiate my teaching. I also use graded assessments or summative assessments after students perform well on formative assessments. Lastly, I constantly check students' progress during the project-based learning by asking them to provide daily reports of what they and each of their teammates did. While students are engaged in PBL, I circulate the room and join each group to check each student's involvement and understanding. I also ask students to submit presentation drafts to check that they are on the right track. Ultimately, their final presentation will be a final assessment of their overall understanding of the unit.